My husband announced at his parents' anniversary party, I finally sold Rachel's ridiculous car for $75,000. Best decision I ever made. His entire family applauded. He gestured to the catered seafood tower and said, "This spread? Funded by that sale. At least the money's being used properly now." I didn't say a word. Then my phone rang. It was a lawyer screaming, "Why is the DMV flagging this title as fraudulent?" The Brennan family anniversary celebration was in full swing at their country estate in Connecticut when Derek stood up, champagne flute in hand, commanding everyone's attention with that particular authority he only displayed around his parents. "Before Dad cuts the cake," he announced, "I need to share some excellent news about a financial decision I made while Rachel was away on her research trip." My stomach tightened at his tone. You all remember Rachel's impractical vintage car purchase 2 years ago. That 1967 Mustang she bought without consulting anyone. He paused for effect. "Well, I took care of it. Sold it last month for $75,000. The room erupted in approval. His mother, Patricia, clasped her hands together in delight. His father, Bernard, nodded with satisfaction. Derek's brother, Kyle, whistled appreciatively while his sister, Amanda, actually stood up to hug Derek. "The money from the sale?" Derek gestured grandly to the elaborate catered spread covering 3 tables. This anniversary party, the lobster, the oysters, the premium bar, all funded by finally liquidating that depreciating asset. At least now the money's being used for something that brings the family together. The Brennans laughed and cheered. I remained perfectly still in my chair at the edge of the room, the chair they always set slightly apart from the main table, as my phone began vibrating insistently in my clutch. "Why is the DMV sending fraud alerts to our office?" a panicked voice would demand moments later when I finally answered. "What kind of vehicle did your husband sell us?" But let me back up and explain how I ended up here, married into a family that treated my existence as an unfortunate inconvenience to be managed. 7 years of marriage to Derek Brennan had taught me exactly where I ranked in his hierarchy of importance. Somewhere below his parents, his siblings, his college friends, his tennis partners, and his fantasy football league. That morning had started like every morning. I woke at 5:30 a.m. to prepare Derek's breakfast smoothie, the exact recipe his personal trainer had prescribed, 16 ounces with specific ratios of protein powder, almond butter, and berries. While he scrolled through market reports on his tablet, my good morning went completely ignored, as usual. I taught literature at Columbia, but Derek introduced me at social functions as my wife Rachel. She teaches some classes. My PhD from Yale, my published research on Victorian literature, my tenure-track position, none of it registered as accomplishment in the Brennan universe. Patricia had called that morning while I was grading papers, but she only spoke to Derek, despite knowing I was sitting 3 feet away. "Tell Rachel we need her famous beef Wellington for the anniversary party," she'd instructed, as if I were catering staff. "And remind her not to overcook it like she did at Christmas." The beef had been perfectly cooked at Christmas, pink in the center exactly as requested, but Patricia had decided it was overdone, and therefore it was overdone. In the Brennan family, Patricia's perceptions became reality, regardless of facts. The pattern had been established early. When I'd won a prestigious research grant my 2nd year of marriage, a $50,000 award for my work on female authors in the 19th century, Derek's response had been a distracted, "That's nice," before returning to his phone. That same week, Kyle had gotten a promotion at his father's commercial real estate firm, and the family threw a dinner party with personalized cocktail napkins celebrating his meteoric rise. My grant was worth more than Kyle's raise. But at the celebration dinner, Patricia had toasted Kyle's exceptional business acumen, while I served appetizers I'd spent 6 hours preparing. The Brennan family dynamics revealed themselves through countless small humiliations that accumulated like interest over the years. Patricia routinely forgot to include me in family photos until Derek specifically asked. Bernard discussed investments and finances with Derek while I sat right there, despite my salary from Columbia significantly exceeding Derek's income from managing his trust fund. Kyle borrowed my car multiple times, returning it on empty with new scratches, always joking that I was too uptight about material things. Amanda was perhaps the worst. She'd borrowed my jewelry for events, returning pieces damaged or not at all, always with elaborate excuses about clasps breaking or stones falling out. When I finally bought a safe for my remaining pieces, she'd loudly complained at Sunday brunch that I was creating an atmosphere of distrust in the family. During their mandatory Sunday brunches, my achievements became background noise, while Derek's most mundane activities received detailed analysis. The month I published in the Journal of Victorian Studies, the most prestigious publication in my field, the entire brunch conversation centered on Derek's participation in a charity golf tournament, where he'd placed 23rd out of 30 players. When I mentioned my publication, Patricia had said, "How academic of you, dear," in a tone suggesting I'd admitted to a embarrassing hobby, before immediately asking Derek about his plans for the upcoming tennis season. These patterns had driven me to create my own separate life, my own achievements that existed outside their sphere of judgment. 3 years ago, I'd opened a private savings account using only my Columbia salary and consulting income. Every speaking fee, every extra class I taught, every dollar I could separate from our joint finances went into that account. The car had been my first major purchase from that fund. I'd found it on a Saturday morning when Derek was at his parents' house for their weekly business breakfast, which was really just Bernard lecturing his children about responsibility, while Patricia served Eggs Benedict. The listing was simple. 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, original owner, garage kept, $62,000. The address led me to a small house in Stamford, where an elderly man named Walter Chen stood in his driveway, one hand resting on the gleaming hood of a car that looked like it had driven straight out of a Steve McQueen film. Dark green with black racing stripes, chrome details catching the morning sun like jewelry. "Bought it new in '67, Walter said, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "My wife and I drove it to California for our honeymoon, drove our daughter to college in it. It's been in this garage for 43 years, but I can't drive anymore." He tapped his chest. "Doctor's orders." He walked me around the car, pointing out details with obvious love. Original engine, rebuilt transmission, new tires, but vintage wheels. The interior smelled like leather and time. The dashboard a beautiful array of analog gauges that seemed impossibly elegant compared to modern digital displays. "Why are you selling below market?" I asked, because I'd done my research. This car should have been listed at $85,000 minimum. Walter studied me with eyes that had seen a lot of years. "My wife passed 2 years ago. My daughter lives in Seattle with her own family. This car deserves someone who'll appreciate it, not some collector who'll lock it in a climate-controlled vault." He paused. "You got that look in your eyes, like you see what this car really is." "What is it really?" I asked. "Freedom," he said simply. "My wife and I, we'd drive up the coast whenever things got heavy, just us and the road. That's what this car gave us, freedom to just go." The down payment came entirely from my separate account, money Derek knew nothing about. I registered it in my maiden name, Rachel Morrison, at an address I'd rented specifically for this purpose, a small storage unit where I could keep documents, and with other several, Derek wouldn't accidentally discover. For 2 weeks, I kept my secret, driving to a parking garage near Columbia where I'd rented a private space. Every morning before work, I'd sit in that car for 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, engine purring, feeling like myself in a way I hadn't felt in years. Derek's discovery came through pure accident, the same way these things always seem to happen. He'd forgotten his wallet at home and used my phone to access our banking app. The Apple Pay notification from the parking garage popped up on the screen while he was holding it. "Parkside Garage?" he'd asked, confused. "You don't park there. What's this $300 monthly charge?" The drive home from the university that day was silent with tension. I knew the explosion was coming. Sure enough, once inside, Derek's voice filled our apartment with accusations and demands. "You bought a car. What car? With what money?" Each question louder than the last. Patricia's Mercedes pulled up within 30 minutes. Bernard's Bentley followed shortly after. Derek had summoned them like calling in air support, and they'd responded with the urgency of a family emergency. They arranged themselves in our living room like a tribunal. Patricia perched on our sofa, her pearls and designer suit making her look like she was conducting a board meeting rather than interrogating her daughter-in-law. Bernard stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. Every inch the corporate executive addressing a subordinate's performance issues. "Rachel," Patricia began, voice dripping with false concern, "help us understand why you're making major purchases without consulting your husband, without consulting the family." Bernard turned from the window. "This demonstrates deeply concerning judgment. Secret bank accounts, hidden purchases. These aren't the actions of a stable partner." I sat in the chair they'd positioned to face all three of them, my hands folded carefully in my lap. The car cost $62,000. I paid for it entirely with money I earned separately from my consulting work and speaking engagements. It didn't impact our joint finances in any way. "That's completely beside the point," Derek snapped, slamming his hand on the coffee table. "We're supposed to be partners. Partners don't hide things." The irony was thick enough to choke on. Derek, who hadn't asked about my work in months. Derek, who'd forgotten my birthday 3 years running. Derek, who'd been working late with increasing frequency, always coincidentally on evenings when his college friend Michelle was in town. This Derek was lecturing me about partnership. "What concerns me," Patricia said, leaning forward with that expression she used when delivering particularly cutting observations, "is the secrecy, the deception. What else are you hiding from our Derek?" Our Derek, as if he were a child she still owned rather than a 34-year-old man. The following months became an extended campaign of psychological warfare disguised as family concern. Patricia organized another family meeting that was actually an intervention, complete with a slide presentation she'd created outlining the supposed dangers of my behavior. Her PowerPoint, and yes, she'd actually made slides, detailed everything from insurance liability to storage costs to depreciation rates. Each slide presented my car as an inevitable financial disaster. Bernard added his voice, questioning whether I might be experiencing some kind of breakdown, using words like impulsive and erratic, as if buying a car with my own money constituted mental illness. Kyle made constant jokes about my midlife crisis mobile, asking if I was planning to run off with a leather jacket-wearing motorcycle gang. Amanda suggested loudly at family dinners that I was probably hiding the car because I was meeting someone there, her implications clear and ugly. Derek sat silent through these attacks, letting his family speak for him, his passive acceptance somehow more damaging than their active cruelty. When they finished, I showed them photos on my phone, the car's immaculate interior, Walter's careful maintenance records, the vintage details that made it valuable. They looked at my photos for exactly 5 seconds before Patricia closed my phone and handed it back. "Well," she said, adjusting her pearl necklace, "I suppose everyone needs their little hobbies." The word hobbies carried enough condescension to fill the Long Island Sound. 4 months after that intervention, everything changed with a phone call to my office at Columbia. "Professor Morrison?" The voice belonged to Dr. Sarah Chen, director of the Victorian Studies Institute in London. "I'm calling to invite you to lead our summer research program. 6 months in London, full access to the British Library's manuscript collection, and a research stipend of $95,000. The position was prestigious enough to define careers. Previous directors had gone on to chair departments at Oxford and Cambridge. Dr. Chen explained that my work on industrialization in Victorian novels had caught their attention, particularly my recent article arguing that factory settings in literature revealed more about women's economic autonomy than domestic settings did. "You were our unanimous first choice," she said. "When can you start?" I accepted immediately, the word yes. Escaping before I could second-guess myself. 6 months in London. 6 months away from Sunday brunches and Patricia's criticisms and Derek's indifference. That evening, I told Derek over dinner, watching his fork pause halfway to his mouth. 6 months? His voice carried not concern, but irritation. "Why you? Can't they find someone local?" "Because I'm the leading scholar in this specific area," I replied, keeping my tone level despite the familiar sting of his doubt. "Because my research is exactly what they need." "A woman alone in London for 6 months," he muttered, returning to his steak. "Seems excessive. Couldn't you do it remotely?" Within the hour, Patricia had called, having received Derek's distress signal with her usual speed. "Rachel, darling," her voice crackled through the speaker. "I've just heard about this London situation. Don't you think it's rather selfish? Abandoning your husband for half a year. Marriage requires sacrifice, and you seem only interested in your career." The security briefing 3 days later revealed complications I hadn't anticipated. The Victorian Studies Institute had government connections through their archive access, requiring background checks for anyone handling certain manuscripts. Agent James Walsh from a department whose name was mostly acronyms explained that my research access would require registering personal assets. "Your vehicle," he said, reading from his tablet. "The 1967 Mustang. Given its value and your access to restricted archives, it needs to be registered in our database as a protected asset belonging to a cleared researcher." My vintage car had just become a federally monitored piece of property. The irony wasn't lost on me. The car Derek's family dismissed as worthless was now under government protection, flagged in databases as an asset that couldn't be transferred without specific authorization. I spent the next week arranging meticulous coverage for my absence. The parking garage agreed to continued storage with enhanced security. I installed GPS tracking that sent alerts to my phone if the car moved even an inch. Every insurance payment was automated, backed up with the garage as a secondary contact. The folder I prepared for Derek contained 23 pages of detailed instructions: emergency contacts, insurance information, GPS app access, and explicit warnings about the car's federal registration status. I highlighted "protected asset, no sale or transfer without authorization" in yellow marker and underlined it 5 times. Derek flipped through it with barely concealed amusement, sitting at our kitchen table in his tennis clothes, his morning smoothie leaving a ring on the cover page. "It's just a car, Rachel," he laughed, tossing the folder aside. "You're acting like it's the crown jewels." The folder landed on the counter where it would remain, unread and ignored, for the next 6 months. London's rain hit me the moment I stepped off the plane at Heathrow, but the sensation of freedom overpowered any physical discomfort. My flat in Bloomsbury overlooked Russell Square, all Georgian architecture and tree-lined streets that seemed to exist outside of time. The work was intensive, but exhilarating. The British Library's manuscript room became my second home, surrounded by documents that smelled of centuries and careful preservation. I uncovered correspondence between Victorian women writers that revealed networks of economic cooperation and mutual support that hadn't been documented in academic literature. My weekly progress reports to Dr. Chen were met with genuine enthusiasm, the kind of intellectual engagement I'd been starving for. The Institute celebrated my discoveries, other scholars actually reading my work and building on my findings. For the first time in 7 years, I felt valued for my mind rather than tolerated for my presence. My video calls with Derek became a study in diminishing returns. Initially, he managed 15 minutes of conversation, asking surface-level questions about my research while clearly scrolling through something on his laptop. By week 3, he was attending his parents' Sunday brunch during our scheduled calls, the family chatter drowning out any attempt at conversation. Your absence barely registers. Patricia's voice came through clearly during one call, loud enough to ensure I heard. "Derek's thriving. We all are." The laughter that followed included voices I didn't recognize. Patricia's emails arrived like clockwork, each one a masterpiece of passive-aggressive concern. She forwarded articles about career women who'd sacrificed their marriages, historical examples of wives who'd abandoned their duties, and think pieces about the importance of physical presence in maintaining marital bonds. Each email signed "With love and concern for your marriage, Patricia." The family group chat, which I'd been part of for 7 years, suddenly showed an error message one Tuesday morning. "You are no longer a participant in this conversation." No explanation, no warning. When I asked Derek about it, he claimed it was a technical glitch, but his Instagram told a different story. Photos from Sunday brunches showed Derek centered between his parents, Amanda occupying what had been my chair. A blonde woman I didn't recognize appeared in several shots, always positioned close to Derek, her hand occasionally resting on his shoulder. The captions read like eulogies for my presence, complete family time, and everyone who matters. Her name was Melissa, I learned from some Googling. Kyle's new girlfriend, according to the tags. But the body language in those photos suggested she was spending more time interested in Derek than in Kyle. By month 4, Derek had stopped answering my calls entirely. Text messages received one-word responses hours later. Busy. Fine. Later. His social media, however, showed remarkable availability. Dinner parties, museum visits, weekend trips to the Hamptons. Melissa featured prominently in most photos, her perfectly highlighted hair and designer outfits marking her as exactly the type of woman Patricia had always wished Derek had married. The GPS alert from my car woke me at 3 a.m. London time, my phone buzzing with an intensity that pulled me from sleep. Vehicle movement detected. The notification read. The attached map showed my Mustang leaving the parking garage, heading north through Connecticut at 2 a.m. local time. I called the garage immediately. The night attendant's voice was apologetic but confused. A man came with proper ID and your authorization letter, he explained. Derek Brennan, your husband. He had the key and paperwork showing he had permission to move the vehicle. What authorization letter? My voice came out sharper than intended. The one from you, ma'am. On your letterhead, signed, dated last week, it specifically said he could access the vehicle for maintenance purposes. I hadn't written any letter. I hadn't given permission. And I certainly didn't have personal letterhead. The GPS tracking showed the car stopping at an address in Greenwich. I pulled up the location on my laptop. Prestige Auto Brokers, a high-end dealer specializing in vintage vehicles. They opened at 9 a.m. At exactly 9:03 a.m. Eastern Time, I called. A man answered with practiced cheerfulness. Prestige Auto, Marcus speaking. I'm calling about a 1967 Mustang that may have been brought to your lot this morning, I said, keeping my voice steady. Oh, the fastback. Gorgeous vehicle. Absolute cherry. Your husband's already got 3 interested buyers lined up. We're looking at $75,000, maybe $80,000 if we get a bidding situation going. My husband has no authority to sell that car, I said clearly. It's registered solely in my name and its title is flagged in federal databases. Any sale would be fraudulent. There was a pause. Ma'am, I'm looking at the title right here. It's got both your signatures, Derek Brennan and Rachel Brennan. Clean title, no flags that I can see. Rachel Brennan, not Rachel Morrison, which was the name on the actual title, the name I'd specifically used to keep this separate from Derek's reach. That's a forged document, I told him. I'm currently in London. I haven't signed anything. You need to stop any sale immediately. Marcus's tone shifted from cheerful to nervous. Ma'am, I'm going to need to call you back. I didn't wait for his call. Instead, I contacted Agent Walsh, the federal officer who'd registered my assets. His response came within minutes. Do not return to the U.S. yet. Maintain your current status. We're looking into this. The next 12 hours were a blur of phone calls, emails, and digital documentation. Agent Walsh confirmed that someone had filed title transfer paperwork with Connecticut DMV, using a signature that was close to mine but demonstrably different under examination. The federal database had automatically flagged the transaction, triggering an investigation. Your husband's created a significant problem, Agent Walsh said during our video call, his expression grim. Forging federal documents, attempting to sell a protected asset, creating fraudulent authorization letters. We're mobilizing a team. When? I asked. Sunday, he said. I understand there's a family gathering? My in-laws' anniversary party, I confirmed. How did you know? Your husband posted about it publicly. 40 guests, catered event, celebration of his parents' about 40 years together. Walsh's expression suggested he found this detail particularly useful. Perfect venue for serving warrants, multiple witnesses, documented location, everyone in one place. He paused, then added, Mrs. Morrison, I need you to maintain normal communication patterns. If your husband contacts you, respond normally. Don't indicate that you're aware of our investigation. Can you do that? I thought about 7 years of maintaining normal. 7 years of absorbing dismissals and accepting invisibility. 7 years of perfect performance in a role I'd never auditioned for. Yes, I said. I can do that. The flight from Heathrow to JFK stretched across 7 hours and 1 ocean. I'd purchased the ticket 3 days earlier, timing my arrival for exactly 4 p.m. on Sunday. 3 hours into what Derek's Instagram promised would be the party of the decade. Agent Walsh had sent final instructions via encrypted email. Arrive at the Brennan estate no earlier than 5:30 p.m. Park in the circular drive. Enter through the front door. Our team will already be in position. The taxi from JFK to Greenwich cost $240, but money seemed irrelevant now. Through the window, I watched Connecticut suburbs slide past, fall leaves turning the landscape into a postcard of autumn perfection. The Brennan estate appeared around a curve in the road, all brick and white columns and manicured lawns that cost more to maintain than most people's annual salaries. The circular drive was packed with luxury vehicles: Mercedes, BMWs, Lexuses, even a Bentley that probably belonged to Bernard's business partner. A catering van was parked near the service entrance, staff in black and white uniforms moving purposefully between the van and the house. I paid the driver, pulled my single suitcase from the trunk, and walked toward the front door. The October air was crisp, carrying sounds of celebration from the backyard, laughter and music, and the particular pitch of voices that came from excellent wine and self-satisfaction. The door was unlocked. I stepped into the foyer, immediately hit by the scent of expensive catering, seafood, and fine cheeses, and that particular smell of money being spent lavishly. Through the French doors leading to the backyard, I could see the party in full swing. White tents covered the lawn. Long tables held elaborate food displays, towers of oysters and shrimp, carving stations, champagne fountains that caught the late afternoon sun. Approximately 60 people in cocktail attire mingled between the tents and the pool area, laughing and drinking and celebrating. And there was Derek, standing on the raised patio area, holding court like a king addressing his subjects. He wore a suit I didn't recognize, probably new, definitely expensive. His hair had been styled recently. He looked prosperous, successful, confident. Melissa stood next to him, wearing a dress that had certainly not been purchased off any rack, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Patricia and Bernard flanked them like proud parents in a family portrait, while Kyle and Amanda hovered nearby, drinks in hand, faces glowing with whatever triumph they were all celebrating. I walked through the house and out the French doors, stepping onto the patio. No one noticed me initially. The celebration was too consuming, too self-involved. Then Patricia looked up, her champagne flute pausing midway to her lips. Her expression cycled through confusion, shock, and something that might have been fear before settling on forced brightness. "Rachel!" she called out, her voice cutting through the party chatter. "What a surprise! We weren't expecting you until next week." The conversations around us began to quiet, heads turning, people noticing the unexpected guest who'd materialized like a ghost at the feast. Derek's face went through its own transformation. Surprise, confusion, calculation. Then, remarkably, he smiled. "Rachel, honey." He moved toward me with arms outstretched, playing the devoted husband for his audience. "I thought you weren't coming back until Thursday?" "Plans changed," I said simply, not moving into his attempted embrace. "I heard there was a party." "Yes, Mom and Dad's anniversary." His voice was too loud, too enthusiastic. 40 years. Can you believe it? He gestured broadly at the elaborate spread around us, the champagne, the seafood towers, the carved ice sculptures. "Actually, before Dad's speech, I need to share something with everyone." Derek's voice carried that particular authority he only used when certain of his triumph. Most of you know about Rachel's impractical car purchase a couple years ago, that vintage Mustang she bought without discussing it with anyone. My shoulders tensed. Around us, party guests were gathering closer, drawn by the promise of an announcement. "Well, while Rachel was in London advancing her career," he paused, and several people chuckled at his tone, "I took care of a long overdue piece of business. I sold that car for $75,000. Gasps. Applause. Patricia actually squealed with delight. Bernard's golf clap started a wave of approval that rippled through the crowd. "And this party?" Derek gestured at the lavish celebration surrounding us. The prime rib, the lobster tails, the top-shelf bar, all funded by finally liquidating that depreciating asset. At least now the money's being used to bring family together rather than sitting in a garage gathering dust. The crowd erupted in approval. Melissa leaned in to kiss Derek's cheek. Amanda raised her champagne glass in a toast. Kyle shouted, "Smart business," loud enough to echo across the lawn. I stood perfectly still, my hands at my sides, my face carefully neutral, while my phone began vibrating in my pocket. The screen showed 3 missed calls from Harrison Martinez, attorney at law, and 1 from Agent Walsh. A text from Walsh appeared. 5 minutes. Derek was pulling papers from his jacket pocket now, spreading them on the nearest table like a general displaying battle plans. The best part was handling everything myself. Researched values, negotiated with 3 different dealers, got competing bids, saved thousands in broker fees. "Brilliant," Bernard said, moving closer to examine the documents. "Absolute business instinct. How did you manage the title transfer?" "Spent 2 weeks practicing her signature," Derek said proudly, too drunk on his own success to realize what he was admitting. "Got it perfect. Looks exactly like her handwriting." He pointed to various signature lines on the documents, each showing Rachel Brennan in handwriting that was close to mine but demonstrably wrong. The R leaned differently. The final N had a tail I never used. Patricia was examining the papers with obvious approval. "Resourcefulness," she declared. "That's what separates the successful from the mediocre." My phone buzzed again. 2 minutes. Federal team entering through side gate. I excused myself from the crowd, walking toward the far edge of the patio as if I needed a moment alone. Behind me, Derek continued his performance, explaining his brilliant plan to anyone who would listen. Through the hedge that separated the Brennan property from their neighbors, I saw movement. Dark suits, purposeful strides, federal agents materializing like shadows come to life. I checked my phone one last time. Agent Walsh's final text? "Maintain distance. Let us handle this." I walked back to the party, positioning myself near the French doors, far enough from Derek to be clearly separate, but close enough to watch everything unfold. The celebration continued for exactly 90 more seconds. Then 6 federal agents stepped onto the patio, spreading out to cover all exits, with movements so practiced they seemed choreographed. The party chatter died like someone had cut a wire, 60 guests freezing in place, with champagne glasses suspended and conversations stopping mid-word. Agent Walsh led the group, his badge held high where everyone could see the federal seal catching the evening light. Derek Brennan. His voice carried absolute authority that made everything else seem suddenly trivial. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, forgery of federal documents, and sale of protected property." The champagne glass in Derek's hand dropped, shattering on the flagstone patio in an explosion of crystal and champagne that spread across Patricia's perfect entertaining space like a stain. "This is insane," Derek stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. "It was just a car. A simple private sale. Selling federally registered property using forged signatures isn't simple, Mr. Brennan. It's a federal crime." Agent Walsh moved forward with handcuffs already in hand. Patricia's scream pierced the evening air. "There's been a mistake. Derek was just being smart, being efficient." The handcuffs clicked around Derek's wrists with a finality that made several party guests gasp. Melissa stumbled backward, her designer heel catching on the flagstone, nearly falling before Kyle caught her. Bernard stood frozen, his golf clap authority completely inadequate for this situation. "You can't just come into our home." "Sir, we have multiple warrants," another agent said, pulling documents from his jacket. "For Derek Brennan, Patricia Brennan, and Bernard Brennan, all related to financial fraud and conspiracy charges." The words hung in the October air while party guests began backing away, creating distance from the Brennans like their legal problems might be contagious. Agents moved through the party with systematic efficiency. One photographed the documents Derek had displayed, his confession now evidence. Another began collecting phones, ignoring protests about privacy and rights. A third was explaining Miranda rights to Patricia, who'd collapsed into a chair, her face the color of her pearl necklace. "This is about that stupid car?" Derek's voice cracked as reality penetrated his champagne haze. He turned toward me, his expression cycling between confusion and betrayal. "Rachel, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them I had every right. We're married." I met his gaze with the same steady silence I'd perfected over 7 years of being dismissed, ignored, and treated as invisible. The silence that had once been my prison had become my power. "Marriage doesn't give you the right to commit federal crimes," I said quietly. Agent Walsh was reading Derek his rights now, his voice carrying across the silent party. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." "Wives can't testify against husbands," Derek said desperately, grasping at legal concepts he didn't understand. "You can't do this to me. I was helping our finances. I was being smart." "Actually, Mr. Brennan, spousal privilege doesn't apply in cases of fraud committed against the spouse. But more importantly," Agent Walsh gestured to the papers still spread across the table, "we don't need Mrs. Morrison's testimony. You provided all the evidence we needed tonight. Your detailed confession, witnessed by 60 people, your forged documents, your description of practicing her signature. That's more than sufficient." He looked at me then, his expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Morrison, we'll need you to come to the federal building tomorrow for a formal statement." Patricia let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "Mrs. Morrison?" "That's her legal name," Walsh explained. "The name on the car's title, the name on her research credentials. Rachel Morrison. She never legally changed it to Brennan. That detail seemed to break something in Derek's remaining composure. You never even took my name?" Another agent had approached Bernard, who was trying to blend into the crowd of his own party guests. "Mr. Bernard Brennan? We need you to come with us. Our financial forensics team has uncovered irregularities beyond the car sale. It appears the vehicle sale was just the beginning of a pattern." The crowd parted as agents led Derek, Patricia, and Bernard through the house toward waiting vehicles in the driveway. Kyle and Amanda stood frozen, unsure if they should follow or flee. Melissa had disappeared entirely, last seen hurrying toward the side gate with her clutch purse and expensive heels. Party guests began slipping away with the practiced discretion of people who didn't want their names associated with whatever this was. Servers started packing up food that no one would eat. The celebration of 40 years of marriage had transformed into a crime scene in less than 10 minutes. I stood on the patio, watching the lights from federal vehicles reflecting off all those luxury cars in the driveway, and felt something unknot in my chest that had been tight for 7 years. The next morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost surreal. I sat in a hotel room in Stamford, not in Derek's apartment, not in any space that held memories of being invisible. Just a clean, neutral room where I could think without the weight of 7 years pressing down. My phone showed 43 missed calls. Patricia? Blocked. Amanda? Blocked. Unknown numbers that were probably journalists who'd heard about affluent Connecticut family arrested during anniversary party. Delete, delete, delete. Agent Walsh had sent a message at 7 a.m., Federal Building, 2 p.m. Bring documentation. This is bigger than we initially thought. The investigation's scope became clear during my 6-hour debriefing session. Federal forensic accountants had discovered that Derek's car sale was just the most visible tip of a much larger operation. For 3 years, Derek had been systematically diverting funds from our joint accounts, creating a web of unauthorized transfers that funded his lifestyle, his family's expenses, and increasingly elaborate cover-ups. The forensic accountant, a woman named Jennifer Park, walked me through spreadsheets that told a story of methodical theft. $18,000 transferred to Kyle's startup that existed only on paper. $25,000 to Bernard's country club for membership dues that were actually gambling debts. $12,000 to Amanda for emergency medical expenses that coincided exactly with her kitchen renovation. Your salary from Columbia, Jennifer explained, pointing to highlighted rows, was consistently higher than your husband's trust fund disbursements. But every month, within days of your paycheck depositing, these transfers occurred, small enough not to trigger alerts, large enough to add up significantly. The total came to $167,000 over 3 years. Money I'd earned, money that disappeared into the Brennan family ecosystem while they criticized my financial decisions. The car sale was different, Jennifer continued. It was blatant, public, impossible to hide. That's what made it prosecutable. Everything else was technically legal, since you had joint accounts. even if ethically bankrupt. But the car had changed everything. By forging federal documents, Derek had transformed years of legal but unethical behavior into criminal activity that brought investigators to examine every transaction. The first dominoes fell within 48 hours. Prestige Auto Brokers, the dealership Derek had used, faced immediate license suspension. Marcus Chen, the dealer who'd accepted obviously forged paperwork without proper verification, gave a panicked interview to local news, claiming he'd followed standard procedures. But federal investigators found he'd skipped multiple required verification steps, eager for his commission on a $75,000 sale. His 20-year career in high-end vehicles ended with criminal negligence charges and a lawsuit from the buyers, a retired couple named James and Linda Wu, who'd thought they were purchasing a dream car for their upcoming cross-country trip. 3 automotive appraisers who'd provided Derek with valuation documents faced their own investigations. Each had given Derek inflated appraisals without verifying his ownership, seduced by promises of commission on future sales. Their professional certifications were suspended pending review by the National Auto Dealers Association. Patricia's social media became particularly damaging. Her Facebook post from 3 weeks before the arrests, declaring, "So proud of Derek taking charge while his wife plays academic overseas," accompanied by photos of him at the dealership, became evidence of conspiracy and advance knowledge. She'd shared it 47 times across various groups, each share now screenshot and entered into federal case files. Her earlier post from 2 months prior, finally dealing with that expensive mistake Rachel made, had been liked by 32 friends and commented on by 17 people, all expressing support for Derek's smart business move. Federal prosecutors noted each like and comment, building a case that the entire family had participated in planning the fraud. The country club where the Brennans held court faced its own embarrassment. Several members had been present at the anniversary party, had witnessed Derek's confession, had applauded his criminal activity. The club's board issued a statement distancing themselves from the Brennans, but photos from that party circulated on social media, showing Connecticut's elite literally toasting to fraud. Bernard's real estate firm suffered immediate damage. 3 major clients withdrew within a week, not wanting association with a family under federal investigation. His business partner, Gerald Whitfield, forced him out through an emergency board vote, paying him a fraction of his equity stake to avoid the firm's complete collapse. The investigation revealed Bernard had been using company funds to cover personal expenses for years, hiding the transfers through complicated accounting that looked legitimate until federal forensic teams examined every line. His reputation, built over 40 years, crumbled in less than a month. Judge Elizabeth Reeves presided over Derek's sentencing with the particular wariness of someone who'd seen too many privileged men believe rules didn't apply to them. The federal courthouse in Hartford had the kind of imposing architecture designed to remind everyone of justice's weight. Derek stood at the defendant's table in a suit that hung loose on his frame. 6 months of federal detention had stripped away the casual confidence that once defined him, along with 15 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. "Your Honor," Derek began his allocution, his voice lacking any of its former authority. "I made a terrible mistake. I thought I was making a smart financial decision. In marriage, assets are shared. I genuinely believed I had the right to handle our property as I saw fit." Judge Reeves removed her glasses, cleaning them with deliberate slowness before responding. "Mr. Brennan, you've just confirmed premeditation and systematic planning. You didn't make a mistake. You spent 2 weeks practicing forgery. You researched values, negotiated sales, created fraudulent authorization letters. Your own words tonight, and your confession at that party, don't minimize your culpability. They prove it beyond any doubt." The sentence came down with the force of years of accumulated arrogance meeting inevitable consequences. 5 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole, plus $340,000 in restitution, covering the car's actual value, legal fees, and damages to the buyers who'd been defrauded. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Derek's public defender, a tired-looking man named Robert Chen, who'd taken the case when no private attorney would touch it, closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Additionally, Judge Reeves continued, you are permanently barred from any financial transactions involving your wife's assets, even after release. The court finds your behavior demonstrates a fundamental inability to respect property rights and personal boundaries. Patricia and Bernard faced their own proceedings 2 weeks later. The investigation had revealed they'd received over $85,000 in stolen funds over 3 years, money they'd spent on vacations, country club fees, and home renovations, while knowing Derek's legitimate income couldn't support such generosity. Their attorney, a corporate lawyer named Douglas Hamilton who specialized in white-collar crime, attempted to argue they were naive parents who'd trusted their son. The prosecutor's response was devastating. Email evidence showed Patricia had specifically encouraged Derek to take control of finances while I was in London. Text messages revealed Bernard had advised on which accounts to access and how to minimize paper trails. They hadn't just accepted stolen money, they'd actively participated in the planning. Their sentences were lighter than Derek's, 18 months each, but the social consequences cut deeper. The country club revoked their membership. Friends from 40 years of socializing stopped returning calls. The anniversary party that had been meant to celebrate their dynasty had instead documented its complete destruction. Kyle provided the most damaging testimony, flipping on his family with remarkable speed when faced with conspiracy charges. In exchange for immunity, he gave prosecutors detailed accounts of family meetings where they discussed my wasteful assets and strategized about accessing them. His testimony revealed years of careful planning. How Patricia had suggested Derek get power of attorney while I was overseas. How Bernard had researched the legal loopholes of joint property. How they'd all celebrated each successful transfer of my money as if it were a family victory. They knew, Kyle said, his voice steady as he faced his parents across the courtroom. We all knew Rachel's money was being taken. We just convinced ourselves it was acceptable because she was family and family shares everything. We turned theft into tradition. The admission hung in the courtroom air like a confession of collective moral failure. Amanda avoided charges by proving she'd returned the $12,000 Derek had given her, along with a detailed affidavit about family pressure to participate in what she'd increasingly recognized as wrong. Her testimony was less useful than Kyle's, but enough to secure her own immunity. Melissa, Kyle's supposed girlfriend, disappeared entirely. Investigation revealed she'd actually been Derek's affair partner for 8 months, the relationship beginning shortly after I'd left for London. Photos of them together, texts discussing their future once he handled the Rachel situation, became additional evidence of motive. She'd known about the car sale in advance, had encouraged it, had even helped Derek practice my signature by providing samples of my handwriting she'd obtained from family thank you notes. Her participation in the fraud added layers of deception that made Derek's sentencing even harsher. 3 weeks after all the sentencing hearings concluded, I returned to Walter Chen's house in Stamford, driving a rental car because my Mustang was still held as evidence in the federal case. Walter answered the door with the same gentle smile I remembered from 2 years ago, though his face showed concern when he recognized me. I saw the news, he said simply. I'm so sorry about what happened. We sat in his living room, drinking tea from delicate cups that had probably been his late wife's. He listened while I explained everything, the arrests, the investigation, the way one car sale had unraveled an entire family's criminal enterprise. The federal prosecutors asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement at Derek's sentencing, I told him. I declined. I decided the facts were powerful enough without my commentary. Walter nodded slowly. My wife used to say that some people measure wealth by what they own and others by what they control. Your husband's family, they needed to control everything, didn't they? Yes, I said simply. The car, he asked gently. What happens to it now? It's been returned to me with a federal protection order. No one can touch it without authorization from both me and the Department of Justice. It's probably the most legally protected 1967 Mustang in the country. Walter's laugh was soft but genuine. Good. That's how it should be. My Mary would have appreciated the irony. Your husband tried to steal your freedom. and instead he ended up putting it under government protection. The divorce proceedings took place entirely through attorneys, Connecticut law showing little mercy to imprisoned spouses who'd committed fraud against their partners. Judge Marion Foster, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, reviewed the evidence with visible disgust. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, and I noticed she'd made a point of using my correct name. "The court awards you all marital assets, all joint accounts, and full ownership of the apartment. Additionally, Mr. Brennan's trust fund, which he used to fund criminal activity, is hereby frozen pending restitution payments." Everything came to me. The apartment in Manhattan that I'd never liked, filled with furniture Derek's mother had chosen. The joint savings Derek hadn't managed to steal completely. The investment accounts Bernard had managed, now revealed to be poorly handled and losing money for years. Even the anniversary party photos, professionally shot by a photographer Patricia had hired, became my property. I considered donating them to the federal prosecutor's office as examples of what not to do at family gatherings. Derek's letters began arriving 6 weeks into his sentence. The first was angry, accusing me of orchestrating everything, of knowing about the federal protections and deliberately setting him up. The second came 3 weeks later, shifting to self-pity about the prison conditions and the unfairness of his 5-year sentence for one mistake. By the fourth letter, something resembling awareness began to emerge. "I've been in a financial literacy class here," he wrote in careful handwriting. They explained federal property protections, asset registration, the legal differences between joint and separate property. "I never asked you about any of this. I never asked you about anything, did I?" It wasn't quite an apology. It wasn't quite acceptance of responsibility. But it was acknowledgement, which was more than I'd received in 7 years of marriage. I didn't respond to any of the letters. They sat in a folder in my lawyer's office, documented evidence of continuing contact that might prove useful if Derek ever violated the court's orders after his release. The story made national news, not just local Connecticut scandal, but a broader narrative about financial abuse, gender dynamics, and the particular hubris of people who believed privilege exempted them from consequences. The New York Times ran a feature, "When Family Money Becomes Family Crime," the Connecticut case that exposed years of financial abuse. The article detailed how federal protection of my car had become the thread that unraveled an entire pattern of theft and deception. Reporters called constantly. Morning shows wanted interviews. True crime podcasts requested exclusive access. I declined them all. The federal case files were public record, 47 pages of documentation that spoke more clearly than any interview could. The academic community responded differently. I received messages from colleagues I barely knew, women sharing their own stories of financial control, of assets hidden or taken, of achievements dismissed, while husbands claimed credit for household income they hadn't earned. Columbia offered me a promotion, a named chair position usually reserved for scholars 20 years my senior. Dr. Patricia Hammond, the department head, explained it during a meeting in her office overlooking Morningside Heights. "Your Victorian literature research is exceptional," she said, "but your experience has also given you unique insight into financial autonomy narratives in women's writing. We'd like you to develop a new course examining economic control in literature and life." The course launched the following semester: Property, Power, and Autonomy in Women's Literature. It filled within hours of registration opening, with a waiting list of 60 students. The syllabus drew connections between Victorian marriage law, financial abuse patterns, and contemporary case studies, including carefully anonymized elements of my own experience. My first class began with a quote from George Eliot: "A woman's lot is to wait and suffer. Except," I told the 80 students filling the lecture hall, "when she stops waiting and starts documenting." The consulting work evolved in ways I hadn't anticipated. Law firms contacted me to consult on financial abuse cases, my experience making me uniquely qualified to identify patterns of coercive control through economic means. My rates quadrupled, then doubled again. Working from the apartment that was now solely mine, I earned more in 3 months than Derek had stolen in 3 years. I sold the apartment 6 months after the divorce finalized. Too many memories of being invisible in my own home. Too much expensive furniture chosen by someone else. The buyer offered $200,000 over asking, eager for the Manhattan location. I took the money and didn't look back. Instead, I bought a small house in Westchester, close enough to Columbia for my commute, but far enough from Greenwich to never accidentally encounter anyone from Derek's world. The house needed work, which I discovered I enjoyed doing. Repainting walls, refinishing floors, choosing every detail to please only myself. The Mustang lived in the garage, temperature-controlled and perfectly maintained, but I drove it regularly. Saturday morning drives up the Hudson Valley, windows down, radio off, just the sound of the engine and the road. Sometimes I thought about Walter Chen and his wife driving to California, escaping to freedom whenever they needed it. On the first anniversary of the arrests, I drove to the parking garage where the Mustang had been stored during the London months. The attendant who'd been working the night Derek took the car was still there, a young guy named Marcus who'd felt terrible about being deceived. "Dr. Morrison," he said when I pulled in. "The Mustang looks great." "It's survived a lot," I said. "So have you," he replied simply. Ruth Morrison, no relation despite the shared last name, sent a card on the anniversary. She'd seen the news coverage and wanted me to know she was thinking of me. "Sometimes," she wrote, "the worst things people do to us reveal exactly who they've been all along. I'm glad you're free." Patricia attempted contact exactly once, 3 months after her release from the minimum security facility where she'd served her sentence. An email arrived at my Columbia address, somehow bypassing the blocks I'd set up. The subject line read, "A Mother's Perspective." The email was long, rambling, filled with justifications and explanations about family loyalty and misunderstandings. She claimed Derek had been protecting me from my own poor financial decisions. She suggested I'd overreacted by involving federal authorities. She hinted that I'd somehow orchestrated the entire situation to destroy their family. Not once did she apologize. Not once did she acknowledge theft, fraud, or years of financial abuse. The closest she came was a line near the end. Perhaps we all could have communicated better. I forwarded the email to my lawyer without responding. He added it to the file documenting continued harassment, useful if Patricia ever violated the court's no-contact order more egregiously. Derek's release date sat on my calendar like a distant landmark, 4 more years away, less if he earned good behavior credits. My lawyer had already filed paperwork ensuring he couldn't come within 500 feet of my home, my workplace, or my car. Restraining orders backed by federal authority that came from his conviction. I didn't spend time fearing his release. 4 years was long enough to build a completely different life, to become someone he wouldn't recognize, even if he saw me. The Victorian Studies Institute offered me a permanent position, splitting time between London and New York, teaching and researching on both sides of the Atlantic. Dr. Sarah Chen called it a dream opportunity, the kind of international position that defined careers. I accepted immediately, the word yes coming even easier than it had the first time. My last Sunday in New York before leaving for London again, I drove the Mustang through Connecticut, deliberately taking the route past the Brennan estate. The house looked smaller than I remembered, slightly shabby around the edges. The for sale sign in the front yard had been there for 6 months, according to public records. Even with a reduced price, no one wanted to buy the house where that infamous anniversary party had taken place. I didn't slow down. Just noted it and kept driving, heading north toward pine forests and autumn leaves and roads that stretched toward horizons I could define for myself. The radio played random songs, and when one came on that Derek had liked, I didn't change the station. Stripped of meaning, unable to touch me. Freedom, I'd learned, wasn't just about having choices. It was about recognizing when you'd stopped being a supporting character in someone else's story and become the author of your own. The Mustang's engine purred beneath me, Walter Chen's gift of freedom carrying me toward whatever came next. In the rearview mirror, Connecticut disappeared behind curves in the road, along with 7 years of invisibility, theft disguised as marriage, and a family that had mistaken cruelty for love. Ahead was London, research, students who valued my expertise, and a life measured by my own achievements rather than someone else's dismissals. The sun set behind me, painting the October sky in shades of gold and crimson, while the road stretched out ahead into darkness that felt less like an ending and more like a beginning I'd earned through surviving everything designed to break me. Some stories end with revenge served cold at family dinners. Others end with simply driving away, leaving the wreckage behind and never looking back. This one ended with both.